back to the microphone now. We will welcome back Colleen Robbins, and she's going to read a story called Jimmy Next Door, which was also published at Lewis University in their Windows magazine.
Okay. Jimmy Next Door. I can still remember when I was a young girl, just starting second grade. I was just barely old enough to notice boys, but still young enough to hide and watch them through the hedges. John down the street and Jimmy next door were having a party in Jimmy's backyard with all the other football heroes. They were all tall and dark-haired, flexing the muscles under their t-shirts. It was a man's party, with lots of beer and a fist fight or two. I sat entranced by it all, secretly sharing their fun from the cool green shade of my hiding place. I pretended I was a soldier in the green jungles of Vietnam, like on TV. I wiggled a little, working my shoulder past the gnarled bark, straining to hear better as they plotted midnight mischief against the other team. With a shout, they left their huddle, goofing around in Jimmy's yard and pitching an old football back and forth. It landed near my hiding place once, and I wiggled madly backwards, getting dirt on my stomach as my shirt got caught on a root. The hero who picked it up never even looked toward me. He was already lining up his next throw. The football spiraled across the yard to Jimmy's wide hands. After a while, the party broke up and all the heroes went home. Jimmy's mom came out to pick up the beer cans and straighten the lawn chairs, lining them up against the back of the house like a box full of tin soldiers standing at attention. She already looked tired with her gray hair and stooped shoulders, but that was because of Jimmy's brother. Jimmy's brother hardly came out in the yard at all. He was the biggest little kid I'd ever seen, with his head too big and all wobbly on his neck, and not hardly able to walk without falling. He never talked, just babbled and screamed like a baby. And sometimes he made a kind of wooing noise when he got excited. When he snuck out this time, he screamed and scared his mother. She dropped the beer can she'd been balancing in her arms and ran to catch him before he could hurt himself. She caught him just as he fell, and I realized that Jimmy's brother was almost as big as his mom was, because she almost fell too. I couldn't figure out why Jimmy's brother wasn't growing up right, but he was taking way too long. Jimmy's mom tried to sneak his brother back into the house, but his father caught them. "What do you think you do? Bring the monster out for sunshine so we grow more?" Jimmy's dad talked funny, and his face turned dark red when he yelled, "Shh, not in front of the baby, and he looks like your father, not mine." Jimmy's mother wrapped her arms around his little brother and hugged him from behind. "There's no monster on my side. You sure he's a son of mine? You been with that Vicente when I wasn't looking?" He grabbed her arm and pulled them both into the house. You could still hear the yelling and screaming right through the walls. I quickly wiggled backwards out from under the hedge and went to sit behind the dirt pile on the other side of the backyard. Maybe a minute later, my mother was calling me to come in. She looked so relieved when I stood up from the dirt pile instead of near the hedge. Sometimes I thought she knew about my hiding place. When the winter came, the heroes went out into the street to throw snowballs. I watched them from inside the window because I knew better than to be a target. Everyone was disappointed when the heroes lost their last 3 football games and then lost their first game of the playoffs. Just before the news came on TV that night, my father told my mother, "The war's waiting to take those boys since the college won't." The way he looked around right after he said it made me pretend I didn't hear it. Everyone knew about the war. The soldiers went and died, and if they came home instead, then everyone was mad at them for not dying. People even yelled at them in the street. When I snuck out of bed and hid by the end of the couch, I could see the dead soldiers on the news every night. And then my father would yawn and I'd have to run back to bed so I didn't get caught when he walked down the hall to the bathroom. Luckily, I'm a fast runner. In the springtime, everything changed. Instead of everyone being happy that John down the street and Jimmy next door were graduating, I heard Jimmy's mom crying every afternoon. Jimmy had lots more parties, but there were fewer heroes every time, and they always ended up in fights. When it came time for graduation, everyone cried. It was only 2 days later when Jimmy and John, best friends their whole lives, walked down the street in their soldier uniforms and got in the car with Jimmy's mom. John's mom wouldn't even come out to say goodbye, and Jimmy's father just watched the car leave as he tried to hold on to Jimmy's little brother. It looked like he was crying, but it might have been because his ears hurt from his son's screaming. Things were very quiet under the hedge for almost 2 years, and then Jimmy came home. I was a lot more grown up by then, but so was Jimmy. Jimmy was left dressed up in a soldier suit, but came back a man even more bitter than his own father. He could barely walk, and the first 2 days he was home, you could hear him moaning all night about the pain in his leg. He was so loud he even drowned out the noisy cats at John's house. John down the street never did come back. Another of Jimmy's soldier friends did, though, his hair all soldier short and he had a wild look in his eye. He brought some kind of medicine with him that made Jimmy all better. I could still fit under the hedge, but it was harder now. The medicine must have been cold because Jimmy would sit in his mom's backyard and warm it up in his mom's copper teaspoon with a fancy silver cigarette lighter that he brought back from the army. When he put the medicine in the needle for his shot, it was really pretty when the sun was out just right, gleaming all silver and gold and a little bit rainbow colored from the needle. Jimmy was very brave because he had to take his medicine every day. If I had to take that many shots, I'd just live at the doctor's office. It must have hurt at first because Jimmy would get very stiff and then slowly relax and kind of lay in his chair for almost an hour with a dreamy look on his face. After that, he'd get up, pull his mother out in the yard, dance with her. His father stayed away from him, though. I guess his father didn't like dancing. Jimmy's friend kept coming to bring him his medicine. It must have been expensive because his mom kept buying less and less groceries on shopping day. And Jimmy was getting kind of thin. Every time Jimmy's friend came, he looked different. His hair was longer, and he must have run out of soap because he was dirtier every time he showed up. He was so dirty you could smell him right through the hedge. He had a thin beard now, and it had food and stuff stuck in it all the time. One time, the medicine must have been bad. Jimmy got sick all over the yard. His mom ran out to hold him while his feet were kicking and twitching, thumping against the ground so hard it sounded like helicopters coming. "Tony, Jimmy needs a doctor. Help me put him in the car." Jimmy's dad stormed out of the house. "No, you crazy woman. He don't need no doctor. He just needs to get rid of his so-called friend." Jimmy's father grabbed the bad medicine, but Jimmy's mom grabbed the other side of it. "He needs his medicine." "Not this medicine. This one is poison." They both pulled on the plastic bag. And for a minute, I thought it would break and spill Jimmy's medicine like a pile of glittering snowflakes. "Let go, you crazy woman. I'm getting rid of this poison." With a final pull that sent Jimmy's mom crashing to the ground, Jimmy's dad ran into the house. You could hear the sound of the water pipes rattling as the toilet flushed about 100 times. Jimmy's mom was crying, but Jimmy finally stopped throwing up, so he didn't need the doctor after all. When Jimmy felt better, he pushed his mother away and stomped into the house, just like his father. Jimmy was shouting so loudly that you could hear him right inside the house. "What'd you flush it away for, Dad? I needed that." "It was poison. You've never been so sick." "I was sicker in Nam, Dad. I was in the hospital for almost a year. Do you want me to have to go back there? What'll that do to Mom, huh, Dad?" The sound of things breaking was almost drowned out when my mother turned up the radio in the kitchen. Jimmy's father took off up the street a while later, slamming the door behind him so hard I thought it was going to break too. He was gone for a couple of hours. It was just as well because Jimmy's little brother got out in the yard and found some string. Jimmy's mom cried when she saw him because he wrapped the string around his elbow, trying to be like Jimmy when he took his medicine. I guess Jimmy was pretty sick for a while because no one saw him for a whole week. Jimmy's mom got in the car and drove away, and she was gone for 2 whole days, but then she had Jimmy's medicine for him. His dad and his mom had a big fight about being stupid, but Jimmy came out in the backyard shaking and throwing up just like he had the flu. He was shaking so hard that he almost couldn't take his medicine, but he finally did after he spilled a little bit. It must have been good medicine because his flu went away too, not just the pain in his leg. When he got up from the chair, Jimmy just put his arms out like a helicopter and spun around and around until he fell down. He was giggling that time. First time I heard him laugh since before he was a soldier. He let his little brother out of the house and chased him around the yard. His father stomped out of the house. "What are you doing? Are you going crazy like your mother? Get the monster back inside before someone sees him." Jimmy's dad grabbed his son and dragged him into the house while Jimmy just laughed and laughed. His mom cried that night. In about a week, Jimmy got sick again with the flu, and his mom had to go get more medicine. She must have known the right place to go now because she came back the same day. Every week, she drove away in the morning and brought back Jimmy's medicine at night. Jimmy was still getting thinner, but that must have been because he kept catching the flu. He had to take his medicine in the morning, too, and sometimes at night. One day, Jimmy's mom stood out in the yard with him. "I can't get the medicine for you anymore. You have to get it yourself." She handed him some money from the pocket of her apron. "That's not enough, bitch." Jimmy grabbed her necklace right off her neck and stuck it in his pocket before he got in the car. Jimmy's dad had to call a taxi to go to work because the car was gone. Jimmy came back with a big bag of medicine, but he used it up pretty fast. A couple of days later, he took his dad's car and didn't come back at all. I guess Jimmy went back to soldiering because the police came to talk to his mom and dad, and they didn't bring Jimmy, just like when the police went to John's house up the street and his mom cried. So Jimmy next door was a hero and a soldier, and finally a dead soldier, just like they were all supposed to be. I stopped hiding under the hedge then because I didn't want to be a pretend soldier anymore. A few of the other heroes came home later, but they weren't the same as before they left. Some were sick, like Jimmy next door, but the rest were just like strangers who didn't know anything about how to act. And the worst part was that somehow they just weren't heroes anymore. It's been a long time since Jimmy died, and I understand more now than I did then. The war ended, and we've seen a few more pass. The local football heroes still have their parties and play their pranks on the other team. There's one who lives around the corner. I think his name is Frank. Frank's tall, blonde, good-looking in a German sort of way. Not at all like the dark Italian good looks of my girlhood heroes, but the young girls seem to think he'll do. The paper listed about a half-dozen scholarships that Frank won, and everyone says he has it made. But I wonder. I saw him wandering up the street yesterday, that same dreamy look on his face as Jimmy next door, and he's been getting thinner. I've heard he gets the flu a lot, but his mother assures me that he's always better by the time she gets home from work. I hope that's all it is. I hope he doesn't break her heart when he falls. Fallen heroes are worse than no heroes at all. Our hopes follow them into the sky like helicopters, only to watch them crash into the earth and twitch in the dust. There's nothing noble about fallen heroes. But perhaps we're looking in the wrong place. Instead of looking for heroes in the height of their youth and power, poised to plummet from the sky, maybe we should look for the ones who crashed and survived. Jimmy's mom cried at his funeral and held her youngest son closer. She's still taking care of him, her gray-haired giant baby, almost twice the size of her shrunken form. Maybe Jimmy's mom is a true hero, doing the best she can in the worst of times, even when no one notices. But the innocent still look for heroes, even fallen ones, and Jimmy's mom still cries when her only surviving son wraps string around his elbow. Never went from real life. Me, totally naive as I was, it wasn't until I saw some movie during high school that I recognized exactly what I'd been seeing and realized that he was on drugs. It took me that long.
Thank you.